What if a ghost story wasn't just a story? What if it was a historical account, so thoroughly documented that it was accepted as fact by an entire community, investigated by a future president, and even officially recognized by a state as the only case in its history where a death was attributed to a spirit? This is not folklore. This is the official, terrifying case of the Bell Witch. Our story begins not in a haunted castle, but on the sun-drenched frontier of early 19th century America. In 1817, the Bell family, led by patriarch John Bell SR, lived a prosperous and peaceful life on their 320-acre farm in Robertson County, Tennessee. They were a respected, church-going family, the very picture of pioneer success, living in a sturdy log home surrounded by fields of corn. They were completely unaware that the very ground beneath their feet was about to become the stage for America's greatest haunting. The family consisted of John and his wife Lucy and their 9 children. The focus of the entity's future torment, however, would be their spirited young daughter, Elizabeth, known to all as Betsy. She was a bright, popular girl, engaged to a local boy named Joshua Gardner. Their idyllic world was unknowingly shadowed by a local woman named Kate Batts, a peculiar and eccentric neighbor with whom John Bell had an unpleasant business dispute over a land purchase. This soured relationship would soon give a name to their tormentor. The horror began subtly, as it so often does. In the late summer of 1817, while inspecting his cornfield, John Bell encountered a creature that defied all logic. It had the body of a large dog, but the head of a rabbit, and it stared at him with unnerving intelligence before vanishing into the rows of corn. Shaken, Bell fired his gun at it, but the bizarre animal was gone. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, a moment of fatigue. It was the first knock of a guest that would never leave. Soon after, the family began hearing strange noises at night. It started as a gentle knocking or scratching sound on the outside doors and windows of their log cabin. John and his sons would rush outside, guns in hand, only to find the moonlit yard completely empty. The sounds grew bolder, becoming a relentless pounding, as if a great bird were beating its wings against the wooden walls. They searched for a rational explanation, but found only the chilling silence of the Tennessee night. The terror then breached the walls of their home. The knocking and scraping sounds moved inside, manifesting as the faint, disembodied sound of someone gnawing on the wooden bedposts in the children's rooms. The family would be startled awake by the sound of heavy chains being dragged across the floorboards, or the gulping, choking sounds of an unseen person struggling to breathe. Sleep became a luxury the Bell family could no longer afford. Their home, now a prison of nocturnal sounds. The entity's attention soon turned from sound to physical interaction. It began to focus its malevolence on the children, particularly young Betsy. Each night, an invisible force would violently rip the blankets from her bed, no matter how tightly she held on. Soon after, she began to feel slaps from an unseen hand, leaving red welts on her skin that would vanish as quickly as they appeared. This was no longer just a series of strange noises. It was a direct, physical assault. The family, deeply religious and terrified of being ostracized, kept their ordeal a secret for over a year. But as the assaults intensified, John Bell could no longer bear the burden alone. He confided in his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston, a practical and skeptical man, agreed to spend the night. He came to debunk a myth, but he would leave as the entity's first outside witness and a terrified believer. That night, Johnston experienced the full gamut of the haunting. The blankets were ripped from his bed by an impossible force, and he was slapped and tormented by invisible hands until dawn. Shaken to his core, Johnston concluded that this was no prank, but a genuine supernatural phenomenon. He advised John Bell that the secret was too big to keep. A small committee of investigators was formed, and the legend of the Bell Witch began to spread beyond the farm. The entity, once a shy, knocking presence, now seemed to revel in the attention. It found its voice. At first, it was a faint, whistling sound, barely audible above the nightly din. But night after night, it grew stronger, evolving into whispered words and phrases. Soon, it was speaking in a clear, strong voice, reciting scriptures, singing hymns, and holding intelligent conversations with anyone brave enough to address it. The disembodied voice had a name for itself, Kate. Kate, as the spirit came to be called after Kate Batts, was not a singular entity. She could speak in multiple voices, from that of an old woman to a young girl. Her personality was a terrifying mix of intelligence, wit, and pure, unadulterated malice. She knew the deepest secrets of everyone in the community, exposing affairs and misdeeds to shocked visitors. She was a gossip, a tormentor, and a terrifyingly real presence who held the Bell family in a state of constant fear. The physical abuse escalated dramatically. Betsy was pinched, her hair was pulled into knots, and she would often fall into violent fits and faint. But Kate's primary target, her ultimate source of hatred, was John Bell SR. Himself. She tormented him mercilessly, calling him Old Jack Bell and Old Sorcerer. She would slap him, pull his shoes off, and fill his waking hours with a litany of curses and threats, vowing that one day she would be the end of him. The story of the haunting spread like wildfire. The Bell Farm became an unwilling tourist attraction, with people traveling hundreds of miles to witness the Bell Witch. Kate would often perform for the crowds, answering questions and demonstrating her power. She seemed to draw energy from the attention, her voice growing stronger and her actions more audacious with every new visitor who crossed the threshold of the Bell home. The most famous of these visitors was none other than General Andrew Jackson, a hero of the War of 1812 and a future president of the United States. Intrigued by the stories, Jackson arrived at the farm with a retinue of men and a wagon, determined to expose the haunting as a hoax. He brought with him a self-proclaimed witch tamer who boasted he could silence the spirit. Kate met their challenge before they even reached the house. As their wagon approached the property, it stopped dead in its tracks. The horses strained, the men pushed, but the wagon was held fast by an unseen force. A sharp, metallic voice suddenly shrieked from the woods, announcing her presence and daring them to proceed. After an hour of fruitless struggle, Jackson was heard to exclaim, "By the eternal boys, it's the witch." The witch tamer, brandishing his pistol and charms, began to curse the entity. Suddenly, he screamed and began to convulse, as if being beaten by a dozen invisible fists. He was thrown from the wagon, crying that he was being stuck with pins, and brutally beaten. A terrified Andrew Jackson and his men spent a single, harrowing night in the Bell home, tormented by Kate, before reportedly fleeing at dawn. Jackson vowing he would rather fight the entire British army than face the Bell Witch again. Jackson's visit cemented the legend's place in history. But for the Bells, the horror was a daily reality. Kate focused her efforts on destroying the family's happiness. She took particular issue with Betsy's engagement to Joshua Gardner. The entity tormented the young couple relentlessly whenever they were together. Her disembodied voice whispering obscenities and threats, promising that Betsy would never be allowed to marry him. Alongside this psychological warfare, the physical assault on John Bell intensified. He began to suffer from a mysterious ailment. His tongue would feel thick and swollen, making it difficult to speak, and he experienced debilitating seizures and fainting spells. During these attacks, Kate's voice would shriek with delight, mocking his pain and promising that she was the cause of his suffering. A slow poison of supernatural origin. By the autumn of 1820, John Bell's health was in a steep decline. The entity's attacks were now constant and brutal. He was plagued by fits, and the affliction in his throat and mouth left him barely able to eat or speak. He was confined to his bed, a prisoner in his own home, while the witch's triumphant voice echoed through the house, counting down the days until his demise. He was a man being actively, openly, and supernaturally murdered on December 19, 1820. John Bell fell into a deep stupor from which he could not be roused. The family was gathered around his bedside when his son, John Jr., went to the medicine cupboard to retrieve his father's medication. There he found a strange, smoky-looking vial that no one recognized. The family was baffled, but before they could question its origin, Kate's voice boomed through the room. "It's useless for you to try and wake him." The spirit shrieked with glee. "I have got him this time. He will never get up from that bed again. She then proudly proclaimed that she had found the vial in the cupboard and had forced a dose of its contents down old Jack's throat while he slept. It was her final, fatal blow in a 3-year war of attrition. A horrified John Bell Jr. tested the strange liquid on the family cat. The animal convulsed and died almost instantly. There was no longer any doubt. The vial contained a potent, unidentified poison. The family, realizing the witch had made good on her promise, threw the vial into the fireplace, where it burst into a brilliant blue-white flame and shot up the chimney like a firework. John Bell Sr. died the next day on December 20, 1820. His passing is the only death in the history of the United States to be officially attributed to the actions of a supernatural entity. But the Bell Witch's reign of terror was not over. At his funeral, as the grieving family and friends gathered to pay their respects, Kate filled the air with loud, drunken-sounding singing, celebrating the death of her mortal enemy. With her primary target gone, Kate's fury seemed to abate. But her mission was not complete. Betsy Bell, worn down by years of relentless physical and psychological torture, finally broke. She could no longer bear the haunting that plagued her relationship with Joshua Gardner. In the spring of 1821, she broke off their engagement, exactly as the Bell Witch had commanded. After Betsy ended her engagement, the entity's presence began to fade. The voice grew softer. The physical assault ceased. One evening, Kate quietly bade the family farewell, but she left them with a chilling promise. She would return in 7 years. The Bell family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, living under the shadow of a promised return. True to her word, the entity returned to the Bell farm in 1828. This time, however, her visit was different. The malevolence was gone. She appeared mainly to John Bell Jr., holding long, complex conversations with him about the nature of the universe, the past, and the future. She made several prophecies, which, according to family legend, later came true. After a few weeks, she departed once more, but before she left for the second time, the Bell Witch made one final, terrifying promise that would echo through the generations. She vowed to return one last time, not in 7 years, but in 107 years. Her next visit, she claimed, would be in the year 1935, to any living descendant of the Bell family. The curse was not over. It was merely dormant. The story was meticulously documented by Richard Williams Bell, one of John Bell's sons, in a manuscript titled An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. The family passed the story down, not as a folktale, but as a factual account of their family's suffering. The land where the cabin once stood is, to this day, considered one of the most haunted places in America. Over the years, the legend has only grown. A nearby cave on the property is believed by many to have been the witch's portal, a place where she resided when not tormenting the family. Visitors to the cave and the former Bell property still report strange phenomena: disembodied voices, shadowy figures, and the feeling of being touched by unseen hands. The spirit of Kate seems to have permanently stained the very soil of the land. But what was Kate? Was she the vengeful ghost of Kate Batts, as the name suggests? A poltergeist spawned from the adolescent anxiety of Betsy Bell? A demon? Or something else entirely? An ancient, territorial entity disturbed by the Bell's settlement on its land? The questions remain as potent and unanswered today as they were 200 years ago. And what of her final promise? The year 1935 has long since passed. Did the Bell Witch return as she said she would? Did some unfortunate descendant of John Bell, perhaps unaware of their cursed lineage, suddenly find their life invaded by a foul-mouthed, violent, and all-knowing spirit? The family history is silent on this point, which is perhaps the most terrifying possibility of all. The Bell Witch case stands alone in the annals of the paranormal. It is a story with witnesses, with dates, and with a verifiable death. It is a haunting that stepped out of the shadows and into the history books, leaving a legacy of fear that has lasted for 2 centuries. It reminds us that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. So the next time you hear an unexplained noise in your home, a scratching at the window, or a faint whisper in an empty room, remember the Bell family. Remember their story, which began with the simplest of sounds and ended in a documented death. And ask yourself if the evil that tormented them ever truly left, or if it is still out there, patiently waiting for its time to return.